Hello, sisters and brothers. Welcome to our small group video series, Grounded, Rooted, and Led. Grounded, Rooted, and Led is a vision for discipleship and church culture that says we are grounded in the gospel, rooted in the church, and led by Christ in the Spirit. Now, at the heart of the gospel and the center of the church's faith is the proclamation that the eternal Son, the second person of the Trinity, in order to save us from our sins, came to earth as a man named Jesus of Nazareth. And he did this without losing any of his divinity and without his divinity melting into his humanity like crayons melting into one another beside a fireplace. In other words, he isn't half God, half human. Rather, he is fully divine and fully human. Now, the fancy name for this is the hypostatic union. It comes from the Greek word hypostasis, meaning the essential nature or substance of a thing. So the term hypostatic union simply means that Jesus Christ has perfectly joined the divine nature to the human nature in one person. The first chapter of John's Gospel puts it like this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So he's with God, and he is God. Now, what this is showing us is that the Son is no less God than the Father, and yet there is a distinction. The Son is not the Father. Okay, so after telling us that all things were created through the Son, so again, he's co-eternal with the Father, he's with the Father before creation, John goes on to tell us that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So he's true God and he's true man. And that's why he's called Emmanuel, or God with us. Now, I could go deep and dense with this for hours and even days. What I want you to know, though, is why this had to be for our salvation, because this is an incredibly practical doctrine. So mankind fell into sin in Adam, that's Romans 5:12 through 19. We're all by nature children of wrath, Ephesians 2:3. So how's God going to save sinners? Well, God can't simply ignore our sin, because that wouldn't be just or holy or even loving. Our sin needs to be atoned for, and that's at the heart of why Jesus came. Romans 3:25 says that God put him forward as a propitiation by his blood to be received by faith. This was to show God's righteousness, because in his divine forbearance he had passed over former sins. Essentially, God is providing a way for our sins to be paid for without setting aside his justice. And that's really a beautiful concept, because when you think about sacrifice, right, you usually think about people bringing something to appease God. But here, God gave us the sacrifice that we needed to be right with him. Like, Jesus didn't die on the cross so that God would love us. Rather, because God loved us and didn't desire for everyone to be lost, he provided the only sacrifice that would satisfy his justice. So here's how this works. Only a human can make atonement for human sins, for it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins, right? Hebrews 10:4. But here's the problem, and it's twofold, really. Psalm 49:7-8 reveals the nature of the problem. Truly, no man can ransom another or give to God the price of his life, for the ransom of their life is costly and can never suffice. So like I said, there's basically two reasons why this is the case. First, none of us is without spot or blemish. We are all deformed and degraded by our own sin. So none of us could be an acceptable sacrifice. Second, and this is essential, God's attributes are as he is. So God is infinite. So his justice is infinite. His holiness, his goodness, they're infinite. So the sacrifice required doesn't just need to be perfect or sinless. It must be of infinite value. Well, only God can do that, right? So only a human can atone for human sin, but only God can make an offering of infinite value. So there you have it. In Jesus Christ, you have Godhead and manhood perfectly united. As a sinless man, he's able to atone for human sin, and as God, he's able to make an acceptable offering of infinite value. Jesus is exactly what Job wanted when he cried out for a mediator between us, that is, between himself and God, to lay his hand on both of us. Job 9:33. That's exactly who Jesus is for us. Think of the shape of the cross. It points upward, right, reaching up to God, and it points outwards, reaching out to embrace us. This is why there is one God and one mediator between God and mankind, the man Jesus Christ. 1 Timothy 2 verse 5. Not just on the cross, but in every way, he is able to be the bridge between a perfectly just and holy God and sinful humans, because he is both fully God and fully human. Jesus can lay his hands on both of us and draw us together. Listen, the hypostatic union is both deep and dense, and I've only given a thumbnail sketch. But I hope you can at least understand why it's necessary. We could spend the rest of our lives meditating on it, pondering it, and we should. But it should also lead us to greater awe and wonder and reverence for God, and deeper love and gratitude to Jesus, our Emmanuel, God with us, God for us, who's also our man in heaven, us with God.